This one's on.
Okay. Good morning. The topic of our debate today is the question, does God exist? Steve Williams will be defending the proposition that we have numerous good reasons to believe that God exists, and Justin Carland will be aspiring to present good reasons to believe that God does not exist. At the end of the debate, ask yourself, which set of reasons seems to be more compelling?
Good morning. When I was growing up, I was told that science and logic on the one hand were opposed to things like spirituality and religion on the other. As I began to study these things in later years, though, I realized that this is patently false, and that science, history, and logic actually provide some of the best evidence available to show that God's existence is logically necessary. At least that's how it seemed to me. As it turned out, my interest in study of these issues coincided with a revolution that is occurring in the field of philosophy in the past 40 years or so, which is, by definition, is a field focused on the study of wisdom and the nature of the prime reality. A few years ago, prominent atheist philosopher Quentin Smith wrote an article about this revolution that appeared in the magazine Philo. In that article, Smith bemoaned the recent resurgence of theism that is occurring among academic philosophers. According to Smith, philosophy departments have now become a stronghold for theism, and he estimates that about a quarter to a third of academic philosophers have become Christians. The reason that this has occurred is that powerful new evidence for the God of the Bible has emerged very recently in the disciplines of history, science, and metaphysics. The following are several facts that I discuss in my recent book, which have very metaphysical implications. Fact number 1. Cosmologists across the board are virtually unanimous in agreeing that the universe began to exist at a finite point in the past and did not exist from eternity past. By universe, we mean all time, space, matter, and energy expanding into being in a tremendous explosion from a single point, and there was no matter, energy, time, or space prior to that moment. Logically prior to that moment. Think about the implications of this. It can be boiled down to one syllogism. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe must have a cause. Now what must the nature of this cause be? Given the fact that this cause initiated the beginning of time, space, matter, and energy, it must be transcended to time, space, matter, and energy. Moreover, since these phenomena don't exist from eternity past, but rather were suddenly brought into existence a finite time ago, it apparently selected a specific point at which to initiate these phenomena, which suggests that it is also a personal being. If the cause of the universe were simply a set of necessary and sufficient conditions, it would have been in place from time immemorial. But cosmologists state the universe at 3.73 billion years old, which is the blink of an eye contrasted with eternity. Fact number 2. Scientists are also virtually unanimous in agreeing that hundreds of constants and quantities in the universe appear to be fine-tuned to an astonishing degree to allow for the existence of life. The secular label for this fine-tuning is the anthropic principle. For example, the expansion rate of the universe is finely tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, which is a vanishingly small number within the range of possible values. Probability specialists consider anything with smaller odds than 1 in 10 to the 50th power to be mathematically impossible. Please remember that number because that's going to come up a little later. Also, again, anything beyond 1 in 10 to the 50th power is considered mathematically impossible. There are many, many constants and quantities that are fine-tuned, tuned to a finer precision than this. To call the odds against their collective occurrence by random chance astronomical would be a vast understatement. In addition to the initiation of time, space, matter, and energy at the Big Bang, there was also the injection of a tremendous amount of ordered information. In fact, the largest number ever used to describe anything actually physical is the low probability of the initial entropy at the Big Bang singularity, which is fine-tuned to the astonishing exactitude of 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. The fine-tuning of these constants and quantities are not the result of any known law and are far, far beyond the possibility of chance. And therefore, I think it's reasonable to conclude that they're due to design. Fact number 3. Proteins are the basic building blocks of life. What most people don't know is that the vast majority of proteins that can form from their amino acid component parts are useless for life. According to Doug Axe of Cambridge University, the odds of a single functional protein arising by chance is 1 in 10 to the 164th power. For the suite of proteins necessary in the simplest possible functional cell, it's 1 in 10 to the 41,000th power. Agnostic Yale University physicist Harold Morowitz calculated the odds that the simplest conceivable bacterium, assembling from a broth of its component parts, is 1 in 10 to the 100 billionth power. Since all three of these numbers are way beyond 1 in 10 to the 50th power, as are numerous other necessary conditions of a cell, it's impossible for these events to have happened by chance. Therefore, I think it's reasonable to conclude that life is here due to design. Fact number 4. What if we just ignored the previous problem and assumed that we're starting the Darwinian process from the bacterial level? One of the world's most prominent evolutionists, Dr. Francisco Ayala of UC Irvine, calculated that the minimal odds of human beings evolving from the bacterial level are 1 in 10 to the 1 millionth power. Three physicists, John Barrow, Brandon Carter, and Frank Tipler, did the same calculation, but included some important factors that Ayala overlooked, and came up with the number 1 in 10 to the 24 millionth power. Again, according to probability theorists, any event with lower odds than 1 in 10 to the 50th power is mathematically impossible. Therefore, unguided Darwinian evolution is mathematically impossible. The enormous scale of these two biogenetic problems has caused scientists in recent years to actually speculate that aliens may have seeded life on Earth. Fact number 5. Even if one were to grant a Darwinian origin of life for the sake of discussion, there is no plausible Darwinian account for the existence of minds. If we are simply machines made of meat, we should be like robots who follow procedures and protocols for self-perpetuation like a computer program. But from a Darwinian standpoint, there is no reason we should have self-awareness or free will while we do this. When you reflect on it, self-awareness and free will are extravagant additions to what Darwinism should create. If we have a soul, however, self-awareness and free will make sense. Fact number 6. The existence of a realm of objective moral values that we all apprehend on a daily basis bespeaks a transcendent anchor for these moral values. If we are simply highly evolved animals, things like rape, murder, and thievery are not objectively wrong, as we observe these things in the animal kingdom all the time, and don't consider them to be moral offenses. This principle can also be boiled down to a single syllogism. Premise 1, if God does not exist, objective moral values don't exist. Premise 2, objective moral values do exist. Conclusion, therefore God exists. Fact number 7. There is early, independent, and multiply attested documentation that Jesus Christ fulfilled many specific Old Testament messianic prophecies that were given hundreds of years before his birth. The odds that Jesus Christ fulfilled these by chance alone is less than 1 in 10 to the 150th power. As we learned previously, anything with lower odds than 1 in 10 to the 50th power is mathematically impossible by chance alone. Therefore, his fulfillment of these prophecies seems to have been supernatural. Fact number 8. Many people believe that the Shroud of Turin was proven to be a forgery with the publication in 1988 of carbon-14 dating from shroud samples that suggested a date of around 1300 AD. What most people don't know is that, about this artifact, is that the world's foremost experts on carbon dating have determined that the dating was contaminated by a bioplastic mold that frequently grows on textile artifacts and that has been invalidated. Virtually every other test of the shroud has affirmed its authenticity in general, and additionally, the likelihood that the image was created by an extremely subtle radiation. According to Dr. Kevin Eastman, an imaging expert at Eastman Kodak, it would take an atomic laser in conjunction with a supercomputer to forge the image on the Shroud of Turin. Therefore, another syllogism follows. Premise 1, it would take an atomic laser in conjunction with a supercomputer to forge the image on the Shroud of Turin. Premise 2, this technology does not exist. Conclusion, therefore this image arising on the shroud was a supernatural occurrence. In terms of explanatory scope and power, the resurrection of the crucified Christ fits this artifact to a T. Fact number 9, the resurrection of Jesus. Excuse me. There are 3 facts concerning the fate of Jesus of Nazareth that are accepted by the majority of New Testament scholars of all worldviews, spanning the range from atheists to committed Christians. Number 1, the discovery of his empty tomb. Number 2, his post-mortem appearances. And number 3, the origin of his disciples' belief in his resurrection. These 3 facts are well established in history. The hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead is the best explanation of these facts, it seems to me. The explanatory scope and power of every alternative explanation proposed to date have paled in comparison to the resurrection hypothesis. The hypothesis God raised Jesus from the dead entails that the God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth exists. Therefore, I think it's reasonable to conclude that the God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth exists. Fact number 10, the immediate experience of God. I think this proposition may be best stated as a syllogism. Premise 1, beliefs which are appropriately grounded may be rationally accepted as properly basic beliefs, not grounded in argument. Premise 2, belief that the biblical God exists is appropriately grounded. Conclusion, therefore, belief that the biblical God exists may be rationally accepted as a properly basic belief, not grounded in argument. In conclusion, we live in a cultural milieu that is highly secularized, so it's very easy to be drawn into atheistic presuppositions simply through a sort of cultural osmosis. When I was younger, I doubted my properly basic belief in God due to this pervading environmental influence. Later on, however, I realized that history is laden with thousands of examples of errors when both the masses and the experts were wrong on worldview and many other important things, so that therefore we should all respectfully question purported authority and consider every evidence available. Almost done. When the evidence available is examined with honesty, the presumed to be authoritative defeaters of the properly basic belief in God dissolve and are replaced with tremendous evidence that he does in fact exist. Thank you.
Alright, my name is Justin Carland, and I will be beginning with my 10-minute opening statement. And I will do my best to not respond to what Steve just said and stick to my opening statement until my 5-minute response time. So, I first want to talk about my history as far as when I was growing up. My mother was Jehovah's Witness, and I spent my childhood most of the time under that particular faith and listening to the different teachings and beliefs that they follow. And one day, around my teenage years, early teens, my mother just decided that we're not Jehovah's Witness anymore. She didn't explain to me why. She did later on in my life, but I'm not entirely sure if actually having been told when I was a kid why she stopped would have made much of a difference for the context of this discussion and the problems that it created for me. To spend so much time under a faith like Jehovah's Witness, where you're not allowed to celebrate birthdays or Christmas or say the Pledge of Allegiance in class amongst your social peers, and then have it all of a sudden just uprooted from you, like, oh, you can do those things now, is kind of a very mentally traumatic thing for a kid to have to go through. To have the rules just changed on you all of a sudden can be somewhat difficult. So that's what basically began my struggle to figure out, like, is there really a God? To have your faith just all of a sudden rearranged for you, just all of a sudden puts a critical eye on things automatically. So as I was growing up, I did believe there was a God. Didn't entirely know who he was, didn't necessarily see evidence for him, but was always told that he must exist, so therefore I must believe that there is one. I also didn't see any evidence for the non-existence of God. I would say that even as a self-proclaimed atheist, that I still don't see any evidence for the non-existence of God. If you were to technically talk about my beliefs, you would more appropriately say I'm agnostic. I do not know. And that is kind of the topic of this debate. Is there a God? Well, technically my real honest response to that is I don't know. However, if you don't have evidence to support the existence of something, why bother believing it exists? And I see in science that you can explain the existence of consciousness or the existence of life without the necessity of adding God into the picture. Science has shown very thoroughly that these things can exist naturally on their own without any sort of an orchestrator or agent guiding it. And there's lots of evidence to support that it obviously wasn't guided, that there were quote-unquote mistakes made along the line that had to be corrected as evolution took its course. Examples being the eye and how the photoreceptors in the retina are actually backwards, and that there's a blind spot in the middle of our retina. Why would that be there? Well, it's because in previous versions of an eye through evolution, these things were not necessarily a problem, but as new forms came up, these anomalies in the design, if you want to call it a design, were a little bit of a problem, but now we have what we like to call mental Photoshop that helps correct these things. And why would an all-powerful, all-knowing designer have made something that could have obviously been created in a much more intelligent way. Like the terminology of intelligent design really seems like a misnomer to me. It doesn't seem intelligent at all. It actually seems like a very unintelligent design. When you talk about like the evidence for evolution, I know that some people can take the evidence and say that it looks like that there was a designer, that the evidence does not prove anything. That is not entirely untrue. Nothing in science is actually proven except mathematics. There are very sound theories that are constantly evolving themselves as time goes on. Physics would be a primary example. We usually don't have anybody of a religious faith trying to disprove gravity or electromagnetics. It's almost always primarily cosmology or evolution. Biological evolution, to be more scientifically specific. Not that there's any real other type of scientific evolution. And physics used to be only classical Newtonian physics. There was just gravity, there was just maybe some electricity, and we thought we knew everything there was to know. We knew that if we threw a ball, we could calculate where it was going to land. We figured out airplanes, boats. We felt like we were really, really on top of things. Then all of a sudden they discovered quantum physics. Did that mean that all the physics beforehand was wrong? No, not necessarily. In fact, most of that physics still applies quite thoroughly. But we still had to change the theory. That didn't mean that we had physics wrong. We just didn't have the whole picture. And we rewrote all the textbooks accordingly. And now we have something called modern physics. And 100 years from now, maybe there'll be a new modern physics. I don't like using that term as far as temporal relativity. I mean, it's always going to be modern. But quantum physics and general relativity didn't exist at one point. And we changed the theory. And the thing with evolutionary theory is that, at least as far as I can see, that the evidence that supports it is evidence that we find that we can verify to be factual and true, and then we create a theory around it. And if we find new evidence that contradicts it, we change the theory. So there's no sort of like concrete evolution is this and we're never going to alter what it means. It will be a constantly evolving theory itself. And so I find that people who want to believe beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is existence of a God tend to come at it from the approach from the presumption that God already exists, and now how do I explain the nature of the universe according to that assumption? And I believe that science comes from the approach that we will not allow any claims of anything supernatural, and we will only gather the facts as we see them in the physical universe that can be verified and tested, and then we create a theory afterwards. And I think that anybody that tries to say that evolution is a religion, well, I would say that that's false, because any particular religion that I can think of almost always never changes. It always has a doctrine that is almost never manipulated to whatever extent it can possibly be preserved, and it's not willing to change its initial presumptions of what was written at whatever particular time that it had been written. Science, on the other hand, will constantly update itself. And so there's not really that necessity to cherry pick. The fundamental thing is that I can see that we can explain the processes that go on in the universe as far as cosmology and planetary formation and star formation and destruction. We can explain the diversity of life through a naturalistic approach. And we can do this without saying that there has to be any sort of supernatural being manipulating the process. Because if there was, lab experiments would never be consistent. If someone could just pray that something was to happen that we can show is not possible to happen, and then all of a sudden it affects physical reality, lab experiments should reflect this. Or they're just invalid. there would be no point to science. There would be no point to doing experiments if God could just change the rules at any time. So there has to be a set of natural rules, and that assumption has to be there in order for science itself to be valid. And most scientists, and I think even most religious people, would agree that in order for the things that they take for granted in the world that have been scientifically created or explained, that there has to be consistency. And I believe that the existence of a God is either unnecessary or would provide that inconsistency and therefore invalidate everything.
Thank you, Justin. Well, you'll recall in the first time around, I mentioned 10 points as to why we should believe in God, or why it seems to be a good reason, or a good conclusion from the survey of the evidence. Let me just touch on those real quickly. Fact number one, the cosmological argument. Why is there a universe? You know, obviously, the majority of scientists, somewhere around 95%, believe in the Big Bang. And more recent theories show that any model that takes into account all the evidence will turn up a beginning, a finite beginning. So the question is, what caused that beginning? It initiated time, space, matter, and energy. Number two, the fine-tuning in the universe is overwhelmingly astronomical. Astronomical is an inadequate adjective to describe it. There is fine-tuning example after fine-tuning example, hundreds of different things that are constrained to exactly the right constants or quantities to allow for life to exist. Number three, and number four, I'll just summarize the evolutionary considerations, looking at the words of Dr. Francisco Ayala, who said that evolution from bacterial level to humans would be on the odds of 1 in 10 to the millionth power. Now, if 1 in 10 to the 50th power is mathematically impossible, it seems to me I should have some awfully good reasons to look past that and believe in evolution, and I don't think Justin provided any. Fact number five, we have self-awareness and free will, which I think I'm going to go back to that one after I summarize here, but I don't see any good reason to believe that those could arise from sheer matter. Fact number six, we have objective moral values, which we know are not just subjective, but I think we know for certain that somebody, for example, hurting a child is transcendently morally wrong. Fact number seven, there is the fulfillment of the prophecies that Jesus Christ accomplished, and way past the threshold of mathematical impossibility. Number eight, we have the Shroud of Turin. There's no naturalistic account for that. That seems to be a supernatural artifact. Number nine, the resurrection of Jesus. If we just take into account the facts that the majority of scholars believe, the best conclusion from those facts is that Christ was indeed resurrected. And fact number 10, the immediate experience of God. Well, that's a personal thing. That's something that's inside, so I'll leave that aside as a subjective thing, but I definitely feel it, and I've been given no reason to doubt it. Going back to the things Justin said, I appreciate your candidness in stating that you're really agnostic, that you're not in the camp of atheism, as in I feel sure that there's no God, but you believe that, you know, the evidence is not compelling to you either way. That's good. That's a step in the right direction, in my opinion. You had mentioned consciousness before. You think you did state you think there's good Darwinian explanations for consciousness. What I would like to ask you is, you know, every time, let's say, for example, I raise my hand, you know, there was a chemical cascade that started somewhere. It went through my brain, through my brainstem, through my nervous system, gave the signals for me to raise my hand. So if you trace that all the way to the origin, are you saying that that's chemistry all the way to the very point of origin? That's all chemical, and there's no other entity that's starting that cascade?
I'm saying that there's no evidence to support anything otherwise.
Okay. Well, the thing about that is that suggests that there is really no free will, that we're just subjects of chemical reactions. Because, you know, I don't see how you get free will from matter, just different arrangements of matter. You know, if you chase it all the way up, if you look at it like a tree, upside down tree, You go all the way to the root, the very source of that. Every moment, we're either steering our thoughts or they're steering us. It's just a matter of random chemical interactions. No, I think we each have a good sort of intuitive sense that we are steering our actions, we are steering our thoughts. When I do this, it's because I thought to do that. It wasn't some chemical set of reactions that's beyond my control.
I think
You have a response to that?
there's two levels to that, though. There's the I wanted to raise my hand, and then there's the why did I want to raise my hand. Did the raising of the hand just result from a bunch of chemical reactions? I would say almost definitely yes. The why, who knows?
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe you have free will?
I'm saying I can't really answer this question in the next like 15 seconds. I would say that it is entirely possible that we don't have free will.
Okay.
It's possible.
All right, that's my time. Thank you. Your turn.
Okay, so I would like to highlight a few things, like the 10 to the 50th power being something that's impossible. That is 9.99, however many more nines we need, to the 49th power possible. It seems like when you start throwing numbers into these finite concepts that tend to have a non-finite context to them, it doesn't really work for me, in my opinion. You mentioned personal being, and you did say, like, this is not necessarily, this is something that's internal for you, that it is something internal for you. I definitely go with that most of the time when I ask someone, particularly a Christian, because that's the type of faith that I'm generally exposed to, that when I ask them for evidence for their belief in God or God's existence, period, a lot of times I get the personal experience type of answer. And their personal experience of something is not evidence for me. My personal experience of not needing a God is not evidence for them. Experience is not evidence. And you could have a testimonial for someone for a crime case that's trying to identify someone, and they could identify the entirely wrong person. But based on their experience, that person was the one who committed the crime, even if it is false. So experience is not evidence.
Subjective experience, inner experience, I'd agree.
Okay. Well, you also talked about like the cause and the beginning of the universe, and that something that has a cause necessitates the existence of God, or something that has a beginning. I might not be quoting it properly, but let me just go with what I'm saying, that the general point I want to make is that if God created the universe because the universe required creation, then who created God? And then we could be like, well, then who created that being? And usually the answer is, well, God is what does not need creation. Well, why don't we cut a step out of that and just say the universe doesn't need creation? I mean, there's no evidence to say that.
There's a scientific evidence that it started at a finite point is overwhelming.
Maybe, but we don't. But science will admit that we do not know. We do not know what happened before the moment of creation, and religion claims to, but there really is no evidence outside of the Bible for the validity of that claim. And so to say that science thinks they know the origin is actually untrue. We just have a very thorough amount of evidence to support what happened afterwards, and that it appears that it started with some sort of maybe explosion, if you want to call it, which is not really the best term for it, that resulted from an expansion from a central point, because we see the evidence of expansion today. Again, it's one of those things where we create a theory around the existing evidence. We didn't come up with this, I think the universe started with a Big Bang, now let's look for evidence for it. No. Hubble discovered that every galaxy is moving away from us, and that the further away a galaxy is, the faster it is moving. I won't go into more details as to the evidence that supports that right now, because I don't have time, but that's how the theory of the Big Bang theory came about. But science will admit we do not know what happened at the moment of the Big Bang, or what happened before. Okay? As far as like saying about the chance of proteins in cells coming about, there is nothing in evolutionary theory, as the theory actually is stated today by the majority of scientists, that would say that these numbers by chance have anything to do with the theory of evolution. A cell doesn't by chance just form itself today. Evolutionary theory doesn't say that's how it happens.
I was talking about the original cell. The first
Doesn't
cell.
matter. It would still be a slow process. There are still chemical reactions. There are still physical laws. There are still ways that things form that based on law and not chance. And I want to highlight one particular thing where if you say that a protein forming by chance is so improbable because it has structure and purpose in our in nature and things like that, then and say that a being had to have created this seemingly so useful thing and so beautiful in its structure, well then is God creating every single snowflake that falls? Because that has structure. Boy, the chance of a perfectly symmetrical water solid forming in that way, that seems so unlikely. But there are physical laws that we know
the structure in that is trivial compared to the structure in a protein.
I still think it holds to my point, though, that chance is not the issue. It's law, natural law.
Okay, I guess that's our time, right?